didn't go there expecting anything. No visions, no revelations, no miracle. It was the mid-2000s, and Gabriel was just trying to find some clarity. At the time, he wasn't a priest. He wasn't even sure where he stood with God. There was something unsettled inside him, a weight that wouldn't lift. He couldn't put his finger on it. Doubt, loneliness, guilt, maybe all of it. That morning, his steps carried him through the doors of the Newman Center at the University of Missouri, though he couldn't remember why. He couldn't recall how he first heard of the place, or what made him go there in the first place. Maybe it was to go to confession, or maybe it was something deeper, something that bypassed logic and tugged at the heart. Inside, the chapel was still. Just a few people scattered in the pews, heads bowed. No music, no preaching, just silence and something else. Something he couldn't name yet. Gabriel sat down quietly in the back. No one noticed. No one turned to greet him. It wasn't that kind of place. He looked around and noticed a Dominican priest seated at the rear of the chapel. The priest wasn't doing anything, not visibly, at least. Just sitting, facing forward, his eyes fixed on something up ahead. At first, Gabriel didn't understand. He thought maybe the priest was meditating, waiting for something. But the man didn't move. Gabriel looked again, and again, maybe 3, 4 times. He even wondered if the priest had noticed his curious glances, and if he was starting to feel annoyed. Then, something inside Gabriel shifted. It was like waking up in the middle of a dream. He looked around at the others in the room. No one was fidgeting. No one was on their phones. Every person in that space, no matter how still, was engaged. Not distracted, but focused. Not on themselves, but on something. So he turned to see what they were looking at. And there it was. At the center of the sanctuary stood a beautiful golden monstrance, resting silently on the altar like a sunburst of gold and glass. In its center, a small white circle. The Eucharist. Just a wafer. At least, that's what he used to think. Gabriel had grown up in the church. He'd been an altar server. He'd attended Catholic schools for years. He had heard all the teachings, all the stories, all the doctrine. And still, until that moment, he had never truly seen what was right in front of him. He stared at the Eucharist in the monstrance, unsure what to feel. It was familiar. He had seen it hundreds of times before at school masses, during benedictions, in holy cards. A white disc in a gold frame. That's all. But that morning, something was different. He wasn't looking at it with learned eyes, or from memory, or from ritual. He was looking at it with his soul. And for the first time, it looked back. What he saw was not just a host, not just a piece of bread, not a symbol. He saw a person. Then it happened. He wouldn't call it a vision, and no one else seemed to notice. There were no voices, no bright lights, but deep within his heart, something broke open. He heard it not with his ears, but in the very center of his being, a sudden interior clarity that drowned out everything else. This is me. It wasn't spoken, and yet it was the clearest thing he had ever heard. He didn't just know that Jesus was present in some abstract theological way. He recognized him alive, present, and waiting. Waiting for Gabriel to stop treating him like a concept and start seeing him as Christ. In an instant, the weight in his chest lifted. His confusion, his doubt, his restlessness, it didn't vanish, but it submitted to something greater. There was peace, but also awe. There was stillness, but also fire. He looked around the chapel again, and this time he understood. The silence wasn't emptiness, it was worship. The people weren't just praying, they were adoring. And the Dominican priest at the back of the room, he wasn't bored or tired or just waiting. He was keeping watch before the king. That's when it clicked. This was not just a quiet church. It was a throne room, and the one on the altar was not a relic of history, but the living God. Tears didn't fall, but they could have. Gabriel sat there, stunned, as years of routine collapsed under a single moment of encounter. All the catechism classes, all the masses he served, all the times he walked by a tabernacle without a second thought, now flooded back to him. But this time with understanding. He realized that what he had once thought of as a thing was actually a someone. That Jesus, truly and fully present in the Eucharist, had been there all along, and he, Gabriel, had been the one blind to him. He wasn't alone in this. Millions of Catholics go to Mass, receive communion, and still wonder where God is. But the truth was right there in a golden vessel, burning quietly in the center of a dim chapel. It wasn't just about belief. It was about recognition. From that moment, something inside him changed. He no longer questioned what to do next. He knew. From that day forward, Gabriel couldn't stay away. What had once felt like obligation Mass, prayer, church now felt like oxygen. He found himself returning to that chapel day after day, just to be near the presence he had finally come to recognize. He didn't need explanations anymore. He didn't need signs. He had already seen what he needed to see. The Eucharist was not a symbol. It was Jesus himself, body, blood, soul, and divinity. And once you've seen the King, you cannot go back to pretending he isn't on the throne. Gabriel began attending daily Mass. He carved out time for Eucharistic adoration. Prayer was no longer a burden or a box to check. It was a meeting with someone real, someone who had waited patiently in silence for years. Little by little, the path became clear. The question was no longer, what do I do with my life? It became, how can I give my life entirely to him? In time, that quiet fire in his heart led him to the seminary, and eventually to the altar, not as a layman sitting in the pews, but as a Catholic priest, holding the very Eucharist he had once looked at without understanding. He still remembers that day at the Newman Center, not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it was true. Because in one still moment, Jesus revealed himself not just on the altar, but in Gabriel's soul. And from that moment on, he knew his mission, to tell the world, he is here. At one point, Father Gabriel heard a powerful quote from another priest, Father Bill Casey, that struck a deep chord. The biggest single problem in the Catholic Church today, Fr. Casey said, is the widespread loss of faith in the real presence of Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. And Gabriel knew it was true. He had lived it. He had sat in churches, received communion, and never truly understood who was being placed in his hands. He wasn't alone. Countless Catholics today go through the motions, speak the words, kneel at the right times, but carry doubt in their hearts. Not because they don't care, but because no one ever told them or showed them what the Eucharist really is. Not a reminder, not a symbol, not a holy object, but a person. If the Eucharist is just a symbol, then none of this matters. If it's only a reminder, only a gesture, only a piece of tradition, then Gabriel's moment in the chapel was just an emotion, a flicker, a passing thought. But if the Eucharist is real, if that small white host is truly Jesus Christ, not represented, not imagined, but present in flesh and blood, then it changes everything. And this is exactly what the Catholic Church has taught since the beginning. At the Last Supper, Jesus didn't say, "This represents my body." He didn't say, "Take this as a symbol." He said, "This is my body. This is my blood." And for 2,000 years, the Church has taken him at his word. When St. Paul wrote to the Corinthians, He warned them in striking terms. Whoever eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord unworthily will be guilty of profaning the body and blood of the Lord. Anyone who eats and drinks without discerning the body eats and drinks judgment upon himself. 1 Corinthians 11:27-29. Why such strong words if it were just a symbol? Why would people be judged for failing to recognize something that wasn't real? Because it is real, because it is Him. The Catechism of the Catholic Church teaches that in the Eucharist, Jesus is present, body, blood, soul, and divinity under the appearances of bread and wine. Not spiritually, not figuratively, substantially. This is the beating heart of Catholicism. Without the Eucharist, there is no Mass. Without the Eucharist, there is no priesthood. Without the Eucharist, there is no true communion with Christ. And yet, as Father Gabriel knew too well, this truth is slowly being forgotten. Polls show that a majority of Catholics, even regular Mass goers, no longer believe in the real presence. They may still attend, they may still pray, but they don't realize who is standing before them on the altar. And that's not just a crisis of doctrine. It's a crisis of relationship, because the Eucharist isn't a what, it's a who. The same Jesus who walked the shores of Galilee, who healed the blind and raised the dead, who suffered, died, and rose again. That same Jesus is waiting, silently, in every tabernacle across the world. And the only question is, do we recognize Him? Sometimes we get lost. Not just in the big moments of failure or suffering, but in the quiet, daily drift. We wake up, we work, we scroll, we try, and somehow our hearts grow distant. Not cold, just distant. That's how Gabriel felt before that day in the chapel. He wasn't rebelling. He wasn't angry with God. He just didn't feel close. And then Jesus found him in silence. Not with noise, not with arguments, but with presence. It's easy to think God is far away, that He doesn't speak, that we're alone. But in Eucharistic adoration, the truth is revealed. God is closer than our breath. He waits for us, always, not just metaphorically, not just spiritually, but physically, tangibly. Jesus, in the Eucharist, waits in every Catholic church around the world. In gold monstrances, in quiet chapels, in hidden tabernacles, He is there. Not as a memory, not as a symbol. And He waits with open arms. Maybe you felt like Gabriel, uncertain, disconnected, searching. Maybe you haven't set foot in a church in years. Maybe you go every Sunday, but still feel empty. Wherever you are, whoever you are, hear this. You are not far from God. He is near. He is real. And He is waiting for you in the Eucharist. You don't need the perfect words. You don't need to impress Him. You just need to show up. Sit in the stillness. Look at the host. Let Him look at you. Let Him speak to your heart in the silence like He did with Gabriel. In a world full of distractions, Eucharistic adoration is one of the last places where the soul can breathe. No noise, no agenda, just you and Jesus. This is the invitation to return to the one who never left, to kneel before the King of Kings, not out of fear, but out of love, to rediscover what the early saints died to defend, what the Church has guarded for centuries, and what millions have overlooked. The bread of life is not bread, it is Christ, and He is waiting for you. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that God is not distant. Subscribe for more powerful testimonies and Eucharistic miracles from around the world. This story isn't just about a priest. It's about you. It's about me. It's about all of us, because all of us are on that same road Gabriel once walked. A road filled with questions, a heart weighed down by confusion, a soul that wonders if God is really near. But his story reminds us that grace often begins in the quiet, in a chapel, in silence, in a glance toward the altar. Gabriel didn't come to the Newman Center seeking a miracle. He came with a tired heart and a little bit of hope. And that was enough. What happened to him wasn't spectacular by the world's standards. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It was deeper than that. It was real. Because in the stillness, Jesus revealed himself not in thunder, but in presence. Not in words, but in truth. From that one moment of adoration, Gabriel's life changed forever. Daily Mass became his lifeline. Prayer became his refuge. And the Eucharist became the center of everything. Eventually, it led him to the priesthood. But long before the collar, there was the call. The call to simply love Jesus and be loved by him. What about us? We scroll, we strive, we chase after so much. But how often do we truly stop and place ourselves before the one who loves us beyond all telling? If Gabriel's story teaches us anything, it's this. One moment of genuine encounter with Christ in the Eucharist can change everything. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to begin. Start by sitting in silence before the tabernacle. Start by showing up at daily Mass once a week. Start by whispering a prayer even when your heart feels dry. Let this video be more than a story. Let it be a starting point. The crisis in the church today isn't politics. It's not just confusion. It's forgetfulness. We've forgotten who is with us. And the answer is not more noise. It's prayer. So return. Return to the chapel. Return to the tabernacle. Return to the one who waits for you in the Eucharist. The world may never understand what happens in that moment of adoration, but heaven does, and your soul will. Follow Father Gabriel's example. Let your heart be pierced by the silence. Let your eyes be opened to the presence. Let your life revolve not around schedules and screens, but around Jesus in the Eucharist. He is there. He sees you, and he's waiting just like he was for Gabriel. All you have to do is come.